the response we get is less than welcoming. And I cannot help but think that some of that has something to do with race.
I had to do something I thought I would never do, and that was I had to apply for public assistance.
You know, the media and hearsay and rumors had such a huge part in the spreading of a story that we now know to be almost completely false.
Every white person in this crowd came with us today to stand in front of us, to have our backs, because they will protect us.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for coming out today. I'm Vanessa Query. I'm the manager of the Lava Center. We are a relatively new community arts space. I say relatively new because we opened 6 weeks before the pandemic. So we've been, I think of us as very new, but it's like, oh, actually we're now a year and a half, but what a year and a half, right? So, you know, we've just been cranking along and trying to bring like really cool community events here, which we have been doing now more and more. Today is actually sort of the launch of a new series we're planning for this fall and winter about social justice in the arts and media. You can learn about that series if you're interested, and other events on our website, localaccess.org. We have an email list you can sign up for over there, and also our Facebook page. And to let you know, we are a nonprofit, and we love doing free events like this. In order to do that, in order to keep our space open, we do rely on donations. So also on the back table, if you're inspired to throw a couple bucks in the jar, that would be awesome. But enough about us. Philippe here today. Philippe Simon is a graduate of GCC and has been working in community media production locally since 2008. Philippe originally comes from Boston, where he spent his early years being active in school desegregation, learning how to and then becoming a performing reggae music drummer, and he graduated from the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. Philippe lived in New York City for 7 years, working for international businesses and performing in bands before moving to Franklin County in 2001. He is currently the production coordinator for GCTV.
Thank you so much. Thank you. What a great introduction. And I'm so glad that you mentioned Connecticut School of Broadcasting, because part of what I want to talk about today is like how we can enable, through what resources we have here right in Greenfield through GCTV, all the different ways that we can go out there in the field to get the kind of training that we need, have people to bounce our ideas off of, and learn how to use the equipment, and learn how to interview people, and learn how to film B-roll and other things, so that more people can be telling this story, and so that it doesn't just fall into the hands of the few. Connecticut School of Broadcasting comes in, believe it or not, in a very pertinent way, because it's part of what we do at GCTV is to build people's confidence and to make them feel comfortable that they're doing something. I remember when I went to Connecticut School of Broadcasting, their main emphasis is radio broadcasting and voice development. And so they had us reading ads for that they had gotten from other radio stations. So I'd come on and you'd sit in a classroom, you'd go up one by one into this booth that faced the classroom so everybody else in the class could hear you, and one by one you'd listen to how each person would read it and be corrected by the teacher. By the time it came to be your turn, you were getting the idea of how a good way to would be to use your voice. So excuse me, you go up there and do something like, come to Stop and Shop this week for homemade apple pie. And then the next guy would come up and he would sort of do the same thing. We had a guy in the class who was from Revere, and he would talk like, Revere, you know, I'm from Revere, I'm parking out back. And so after a while, he heard how we were reading this, and he started to ask us, can you tell me how I'm supposed to read that? And so we would work together a lot, and we would help each other. And I think that that was an important aspect of how we made everybody in the class kind of have a unified non-accent. Everybody was able to read for a mass audience. And in just a few weeks, this guy from Revere was going up and going, homemade apple pie from Stop and Shop. You know, and so he was getting the skills, he was developing his voice, and now there was something they thought he couldn't do that he could do. A lot of us went on to other broadcasting facilities. My friend Marty, he worked for Movie Phone, And that's a good paying job. And I would love to know where this guy from Revere ended up, because he wound up with a really good, usable, professional voice. And that's what we want to do to people in this community, is to give them the skills that they need so that they can mirror, or they can be coming close to, and even delivering a professional video. So I am very sensitive in social justice issues and matters of race. It's been a thing that I've had to deal with my whole life. I, at a very young age, was given the opportunity to go to a brand newly built school called the William Monroe Trotter School in Roxbury for the 3rd grade, starting in 3rd grade. I'd just been in a very inkwell and old desks bolted to the floor kind of school that was heavy on discipline, and they couldn't hit us anymore, but they would make us stand up against the wall. I went into a whole different subsystem, and it was actually called the subsystem, and it was experimental integration back in 1968 and 69, 4 or 5 years before the court ordered mandate to do so. I didn't know what to expect. However, I can simply tell you this, that it was nothing. It was no challenge. It was no difficulty for me to get through or anything like that. It was the most fun place to be. The kids were so friendly. All of the school had been conferenced or had talked or had met where the parents had talked to the kids about being welcoming, and it made a huge difference. There were incidents that popped up from time to time, but they were dealt with by the group of kids. So I had a wonderful welcoming experience in that community. And it showed me the insanity, barbarism, and total unnecessary nature of racism. Everything that I had been taught or had seen on television or whatever media I had been exposed to, or family opinions, were completely wiped out after probably the first day that I was there. I'd say the first 5 minutes. But anyway, I am here now in Greenfield, and I've been working for Greenfield Community Television now for about 12 years, 12 or 13 years. I hate to use the number 13, but I'm really not superstitious. And I walked into GCTV with the interest to combine my interests in social justice and community activism and in just the development of communities and how groups of people live with some kind of media. And I was told that I could intern at Greenfield Community Television. So I went in and I became an intern. Less than a year later, I was hired as a part-timer, and a couple of years later, I've been full-time ever since. I'm now the production coordinator. I have a lot of responsibilities, and those responsibilities have been greatly enhanced and greatly made of ease through more technology and really good leadership that we have at GCTV right now. So we're going to see today some of the examples that I've made of how I've filmed, how I've interviewed, and what I've filmed and interviewed and presented on these stories about social justice, mostly revolving around issues that happen here in town and Black Lives Matter. When that started getting really big in this area, there was a lot of news to cover. There were a lot of things to show a neutral perspective on so that people could educate themselves and take away the rumors, the doubt, the suspicions, the superstitions, and so on. So the first film we're going to see is, we bumped into it by mere chance. We were filming the Citizens of the Year Award at Deerfield Academy that the Recorder holds every year. And in the middle of this event, a group from Black Lives Matter showed up and had something to say to the audience. We let our cameras roll, and then I invited 2 of the people, or as many of them as could have the time, to come in and talk about why they did what they did and what it meant to them to do that. So let's watch that right now.
Every 28 hours, a black person is killed by the police. We are standing here today for all the black and brown lives that are murdered almost daily due to police terrorism in our community. Eric Garner was
This past December, the Black Lives Matter movement held an action during the December Franklin County Chamber of Commerce's breakfast meeting and award ceremony. GCTV met with two of the participants of the action at our Greenfield studios to talk about what the Black Lives Matter movement aims to accomplish and why these participants felt compelled to take action.
I'm from Cape Cod. I'm Mashpee Wampanoag and African American, of course. So I grew up in a very gentrified area with very much that crowd. And to me, it's most important that that crowd hears the message more than any other crowd. Those are the people who allow the system to continue. When people are comfortable and they're not, intervened on, they have no reason to confront the system that oppresses and kills so many people every day. There is absolutely an ultimate aim. I would say equality in every sense of the form. Economic justice, to really take a long look at the prison industrial complex that has been basically the new Jim Crow, used to make money for the American system on the backs of largely black and brown people. We want equal, quality schools, quality food. There's so many things.
We're not gonna stop till people are free.
I really want to live in a society where everyone has the opportunity to feel safe, to thrive, to, have meaningful connections everywhere they go. I'm a Jewish person who comes from a people that has historically been really marginalized, and I have a lot of personal experiences of being ignored and ostracized among white people, and I don't like that, and I don't want anyone else to have to experience that either, and I certainly don't want to see the level of state violence in form of, police brutality, incarceration, arrest, strict court sanctions, fees, things like that disproportionately impact black people and other people of color in our society. Focusing particularly on black communities, because that's what this movement is about. I think that there are sort of two interlocking forces going on. There's the economic exploitation and marginalization where, it can be really hard for people in black communities to find any job. Let alone even a minimum wage job, but to find any job. It's easier, if I were to be convicted of a felony, it'd be easier for me as a white man with a felony record to get a job than a young black man without any kind of record, just based on the kind of profiling and discrimination that goes into hiring practices. Black people in our society are really kept out from the jobs that do exist. And then on top of that, also experience this really targeted and intense level of state violence, in the form of searches, brutality on the street, searches of homes, and higher rates of incarceration, higher sentencing for different kind of crimes, things like that. Much higher arrests for things like drug crimes, even though white people do drugs the same amount that black people do.
GCTV also wanted to know why civil disobedience and a prominent, loud presence is so essential to this movement's success.
Legislative gains are not made without revolution. Without people in the streets demanding justice, the justice just doesn't come. And that goes for the black elite class as well, who are comfortable in their positions and don't really want to challenge the system because they're very comfortable. And so unless people are faced with these issues and these bodies day in and day out, things won't change.
Both also talked about why they wanted to include and engage a wider community and why that is a key to victory both today and historically.
I believe it's LBJ's quote, that if you convince a white man, even the lowest white man on the totem pole, that he's better than a black man, you can pick his pockets. If you give him somebody to look down on, he'll empty his pockets for you. And to me, I believe that's been the exact course of the American history. And I think that it is a struggle. I mean, obviously there's many struggles, racism, of course, being the topic of the hour, but that racism has been able to continue because the white working class specifically has been also oppressed in a way by the elite. And racism is a distraction so that we can all be oppressed by the elite.
Yeah, I was actually kind of disappointed with some of the response that we got at the action. You know, we went in there with the idea that we were going to sing a song, and we passed out lyrics to this beautiful song about fighting, racist policing and standing up for justice. And we passed out the lyrics. And in fact, as we went around and passed out the lyrics and some information, a lot of people, said to me, thank you. I'm so glad you're here. This is really wonderful what you're doing, being here at the Franklin County Chamber of Commerce and speaking up about this. And, speaking of white supremacy, it was these white male authority figures, a few high-powered people in our communities who, got up, who yelled at us, who threatened to arrest us, who ushered us out of the room. And I wonder, I have to really wonder what would have happened there, if those people hadn't acted in such a swift and domineering way. I mean, maybe we could have actually had a very, inclusive and supportive community moment rather than a sense of, being in some kind of battle with one another.
So I would encourage any white person who doesn't see race or themselves aren't racist to move beyond the guilt that you might feel admitting your own racism or your own prejudice, to move through that and address the racism that you see every day, that kills people, that inflicts violence on children, all the way up to a 92-year-old woman who was killed by the police. That we will only move beyond the violent white supremacy that we've been living under once people address that. And while I absolutely believe that black and brown voices should be elevated or, magnified or whatever you want, however you want to term it, and I think that black voices have been muted for so long, I think it's absolutely important that black voices are heard. But I would also say in that same breath, this might sound strange, but I'd actually like to empower some of the white folks out there, especially the white working class. To me, the white people in America are the only ones who will end white supremacy. Black people cannot end white supremacy. We have been trying for 500 years. And we can change our speeches, and we can change our behavior, and we can change anything, and it will not end white supremacy. White people have to address their white supremacy, their parents' white supremacy, their children's white supremacy, and I think that the most important job that any of us can have is addressing racism and teaching the next generation better.
If you'd like more information on the Berkshire Black Lives Matter movement, check them out on Facebook. And check back to gctv.org every day this week for more stories in this series. Great. So I think you saw the action, and then you saw the explanation of the action. And they really brought up a lot of really good points about why they were doing what they were doing and why they targeted that specific audience. This particular filming, this was one of my first, so you can see there's some imperfections in like how I filmed it. I think the background may be a little bit too close, and it's a little oversaturated with the color. And I used the same sweeping piece of B-roll, which kind of like throws people off a little bit. So that is my own critique technically. And if you have a technical observation or question in terms of like how I got in touch with them and all of this other stuff, please ask me now.
I will say I like the use of introducing their audio explaining the event while the event was still being presented. And so that was a really nice transition between those two elements of it. And I was also intrigued about how you engaged with them afterwards.
Yeah, so Scott McPherson, who was our director that day, walked up to me and said, "Tell me you got that." And I said, "Yes, I got it." And I felt like a real TV person right in that moment. And I said, "Do we have their contact?" And someone figured out where they were from. They were really in a hurry to get out of there. They did talk to some of us, but they didn't feel comfortable giving out personal information. So I got Berkshire Black Lives Matter, and I looked it up online. I sent an email, and it just so happens that Natan here is someone who eventually began to work at the Recover Project in this town. And Sani, the other guest, she is a Mashpee Wampanoag, and she is kin to my stepfamily. And I had no idea. And so it's an interesting place that this interest in exposing racism and in anti-racism dumps me in some very interesting places. This was using the cameras that we're looking at right now, the Sony NX cam. That's when we first got them. And there I was filming the Citizen of the Year award. And the woman, you know, it's interesting too, because yes, it did look like there was a response that was a little over the top and there was some objection. But I think in retrospect, all of those people in that room have come a long way. I'd say most of those people in that room have come a long way in their understanding of these types of events through the years. And that's a good thing, you know, and I hope that they see this so they can see where they were at some point. Any other questions? Okay, so the next anti-racism gathering, this was a story that made me want to become a member of the Human Rights Commission in Greenfield. And what had happened was a child saw a Confederate flag in his neighbor's garage, and it happened to be the son of a policeman. And so this brought on a whole lot of issues. And here, what I wanted to do here is to just interview as many people as possible about their perspective on this and their perspective on why it was important to gather. And you can see there's a wide variety of people. Let's watch this and let's talk about that incident and some of the techniques that I was able to use. I will say this, when you have a protest like this, you have an image to show. You know, you have a background for who you're interviewing. So there's so much context in protests. I just love covering them. Anyway.
People wanted to have a protest, a standout, to contradict the idea that a lot of people supported the police officer flying the Confederate flag. And you know, many people feel the Confederate flag is a symbol of racism and a symbol of slavery, and that we shouldn't, you know, we don't want to act like Greenfield supports that. And, you know, not commenting on the police officer himself, we feel police have to be held to a higher standard. If they hold personal feelings of racism, then they can't serve the entire community. At the end of the Civil War, that Confederate flag continued to mean that. And I think if we look at the history of the Civil Rights Movement, you see the people who opposed the Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 60s flying the Confederate flag. It stood for racism. It stood for segregation. And it still does today. When you go to the websites of racists and segregationists, they have the Confederate flag flying. But it means death and murder to African Americans and other people of color. And I think we can't forget lynchings were done with people flying the Confederate flag after the Civil War. And so it's not just a benign symbol, it stands for violence, murder, and racism. You know, racism isn't just individual feelings. You have people being individually racist. We have to look at, you know, racism in housing, people being denied housing. We have to look at people being denied jobs. So when we talk about institutionalized racism in this country, we have to look at the lending practices of banks. I think, you know, it is heartening to see in this area that the police and the mayor have reacted quickly on this. Compare that to Chicago, where, after the murder of that young black man, it was covered up for over a year. I think that's because we have an active community here that people won't let it stand. I think we do have to go further, though. I think to ensure these things don't happen, we really have to talk about that police who hold individual racist feelings just because they hide it and don't hang the Confederate flag can't be allowed to be policemen. We have to look at that. And I think we have to set standards for when police can use force.
Doing this, all of this, I think it's good because it shows that some people are still brave and they're still the audacity to come out here to come and do this without any problems. And Greenfield's letting them do it with peace in mind. So I think it's good. I think it's perfect.
I think it needed to have a quick response, to be honest with you, and I don't think we're done yet either. We're certainly not done talking about it and not done working on it, and it's obviously an important subject topic, not here, everywhere, and I think it required a lot of reflection, and I think it was important for us to. It was important for me anyway to reach out to those folks, and especially that young man, and just let him know that. We are here for him. I'd hate to have him ever think that I wasn't going to be here for him. And obviously, I'm going to work hard to continue what I've done for the last couple of years here and get out in the community with everybody and welcome them in and continue to do my cups and coffee and talking with people and just continue that type of work, because I think this is extremely unfortunate, but I do think it needs the attention that that it gets, and I understand it. It's not. I just wanted to stop out today and say hi to some folks and let them know that. Well, I'm here to say hello. Obviously, I'm a police officer, so I'm not gonna.
I think the people in Greenfield, all of the people in Greenfield, those who are our legislators, those who are our businessmen and town leaders and people in general, need to be open to having a conversation about racism. Ignoring it, hiding it, not talking about it, not being willing to deal with it, only creates that vacuum, allows it to be more insidious. We socialize our children to that. Children are not born being prejudiced. They learn that. So a conversation needs to be had, and it needs to be had by all. And sure, it's painful, it's ugly, nobody wants to look at it, but if you don't take the Band-Aid off, the wound never gets the air to heal.
The discussion came up during the election, and I'm glad that we started this conversation. I'm not glad of what's happening now, but I think the important first step is to have the conversation. But you make a good point. It's not something that's going to attract people or businesses to our town if this is the reputation we have. What I think that today is about, though, is not necessarily a protest or pointing fingers. I think it's important for us to raise awareness. People may do things without any harmful intention. But we do have a responsibility as a member of our community to take a step into the shoes of others and understand that maybe what we're doing, what we're saying can affect someone and really hurt them. So I'd like to look at today and the gathering today as more of that instead of, again, pointing fingers or making labels, but more just let's raise awareness and let's just try to be a little more concerned with each other.
Okay, thank you for watching that. I'm going to go back and do a little technical recap. One thing that I learned from this is when I watched after I'd edited this and put it out and everything, that it's really important where you stand. Like if your camera's here and you're standing here and they're looking off the screen and talking in that direction, you may have wanted to be on this side, or you may want to be right behind your camera so that they look into the camera and they're actually talking to the public when people see this aired. It's also okay if they look at you, but when you do the whole widescreen thing where you offset people a little bit so they're not right in the middle, if you want to do that technique, great, but I didn't do it correctly there. And And that is a big difference. If I had been standing over on this side, they would have been looking this way and projecting the thoughts into that empty space. So that's why you have that kind of empty spaces to show where the thoughts are being projected to. I think there's other reasons why we do that, and Nick is here, so could you tell us a few things about why we do things with widescreen the way that we do? And make sure you get the camera on anybody who speaks. That'd be great.
Yeah, so I think framing is really important. And one of the things that transitioned between going from the classic 4:3, that more square framing, to this widescreen framing, is that a single face occupies less of the frame of the TV. And so you end up having this visual language that even if we don't know it, we internalize it as like a feeling.
Yeah.
And so having that lead room in front of them gives them space to breathe and tell their story. And you'll see in TV shows and things where they want to heighten anxiety, they'll just push that frame over the side so the person is like, their nose is right up against the edge of the frame, and that creates a sense of anxiety. And so how we frame people can help convey the emotion of what they're feeling and what they're trying to share with us. And you're absolutely right about where you stand in relation to a person, because you want them to have a connection. And the question, and it's really common to not have them look right into the camera. But sometimes if the camera's a little too far off, it alienates the viewer. And so it's all these little things come into play. But I totally love your point about once you've edited a piece, you realize what you did while you filmed. And to me, it's an endless learning process. Like, it's okay to screw up, but you learn from it, you know, and you're like, oh, I wish that I had gotten more shots that did this, or when I framed them, I should have done this. And so the next time you go and film a community event, the next time you go and interview a person, you bring that back into the thought, and it's just this continual process of learning and sharing the stories effectively that I really enjoy.
Right, it just, when you do your first story, it doesn't set, that's not your career. That's just the very beginning. And I always say that my filming teaches me how to edit, and my editing teaches me how to film. So retrospect and self-analysis is the greatest tool of a filmmaker. Retrospect and self-analysis is two really great tools for an entire society struggling with racism. So, and as you can see, and you know, this was in 2014, 2015, and we still have some of these same problems. So I see the sentiments there, I see the knowledge is there, I see that the police chief and his assistant were very responsive and very touched by that, had an emotional reaction to the child's needs. Where does it go from there though? And so Sani Wittu had said, if we don't bring these issues out onto the street, then we keep forgetting them. And regardless of what the police come up with, regardless of what the town government comes up with, it's really up to us, the citizens, to keep the message alive and to keep reminding people what we tolerate and what we don't. And what works for everybody is good for us all. So you can also see that in some cases I narrated an intro and some cases I didn't. At this event, I think I narrated sort of after a little bit, after hearing someone speak, but I'm not even, I don't remember, did I narrate it all in this last piece? No, I didn't. And what I wanted to open up with was just the sound of people out on the street. And then I let that sit for about 3 or 4 seconds. And then David Cohen came in, who was with Jobs for Justice then and is now in charge of, or one of the leaders of Franklin County Continuing the Political Revolution, which really does have a great membership, and they do take on a lot of issues. I think one of the things that you're going to come into a problem with is if you don't have a protest to film and you're trying to talk to someone about what their opinion is, what their knowledge is, what kind of program they may have, you know, to combat racism, or to maybe we can even make it positive, to increase tolerance among people. And if they're talking about something like that, it could be really hard to get the B-roll that you need. I do want to remind everyone that there is a Library of Congress that you can use any kind of footage that they have in there, and it's all marked whether or not you can use it. There's public domain footage that you can use, and that you can get a lot of stuff that's historical for your B-roll. However, it leaves out what the imagery is that you're going to present. And I will simply say that people do get a little bit bored if they're just watching someone's head talking for the whole story. So to be creative and to think about what we call B-roll, the shots that you cut away to hide edits or to just show the context of them speaking. If you've interviewed them and there's nothing spectacular happening around them right there, take a note of some of the things that they talk about and see if you can go out and film it. And if there's nothing exactly happening about that, not graphically, be poetic. You know, I was once asked to do something, a promo for the mayor's task force, and there was on domestic violence, and we couldn't get any, we didn't want to act it out, and we couldn't get any footage of like people doing that. So I said, well, maybe we could get like an alley with like a breeze blowing, something that's like dark and scary, or to put as B-roll in something like that. And so there's a lot of things that you can think of doing. The next, I want to show you the part of the next, this is not on my outline here, but I want to show you this next, since we're talking about the B-roll, I want to show you how I dealt with this, because this is people just talking to me in the TV studio that I'm filming about racism around town. Can you do modern racism news? And we're just going to watch the beginning of it.
Racism in today's modern society still exists. And although it may not manifest itself in the traditional or historical way, with public and outwardly blatant acts of discrimination and violence, institutionalized racism creates an unbalanced access to the goods, services, and opportunities of society, and is extremely difficult to identify. It is often harder to recognize because it is so subtle, and as a result may be more widespread and dangerous than we can imagine. Franklin County, although a bastion of liberalism, still suffers from institutionalized racism, and this is reflected through income levels, job opportunities, and rates of incarceration, to name a few. GCTV spoke with 3 individuals from the Greenfield area who specifically work either with the disadvantaged or as advocates for social equality. Glenn Franklin, Leadership Development and Diversity Coordinator at Community Action's youth programs, shared with us some of the racism he has experienced locally.
I've had situations where I've been running programming with youth, and over the phone, when I have conversations with people over the phone, the manner of the conversation is very professional. It's well known, and the youth are welcomed, the program is welcomed, and I will show up with youth in tow, and I've had situations where people looked at me and said, "Whoa, you know, you're Glenn, you're that person." You know, and it makes me, you know, I'm a rather direct person, and I can say to the person, you know, well, yes, and we spoke on the phone, and this is the program, and we're excited to be here. And the response we get is less than welcoming. And I cannot help but think that some of that has something to do with race.
Buzz Eisenberg, professor at GCC and American Civil Liberties Union attorney of 25 years, has been representing Guantanamo detainees since 2004 and has seen how racism on an international level can create certain attitudes and beliefs locally.
It was King who said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Franklin County is certainly not immune to that. There's something about us that feels better about ourselves when we can feel badly about somebody else. And while Franklin County doesn't deserve headlines as being the most intolerant of counties in America or globally, again, we're not immune to it. My experience,
Okay, cut right there.
especially
So yeah, I mean, what they have to say is wonderful, and I was happy to do this. But I just wanted to show you some of the way that I put some B-roll together, at least over my narration. Usually and people who come in and do news stories or do interviews or documents or anything, you're welcome to be on camera. You can narrate. I thought it was more professional as a community filmmaker to be off camera and to allow the story to speak for itself. So there's very little me on camera like a newsman. I'm here at blah, 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 talking to so-and-so. So, but what I did do is I had some shots around town when we talked about Franklin County. I had some things that I pulled from the Library of Congress showing some police brutality in, I think that was Chicago actually, against protesters and things like that. So you can be creative if you want to hide yourself or if you just don't want to have yourself on the film. The next one we're going to talk about is, this is what I call the double edge of incarceration and racism.
I thought it was kind of humorous when you put the statue in front of the library on the Cuban American war veterans. And this guy has been at Guantanamo, correct, as a lawyer? Unfortunately, I think they went over most people's heads.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. To me, the Spanish-American War is a symbol of America's new global imperialism and the racism that accompanies that. So I wanted to get a picture. I wanted to include that statue because it's kind of a symbol of Franklin County. You know, we're the county seat, and there's this famous statue here from the Spanish-American War, and but yet what it really represents is, I think the viewer could take it in any direction, you know. Any other questions on this last? So something wonderful happened, and I really loved it. Trenda Lofton, who's a local real estate agent and who's also involved in the Lava Center for things, had a program, a theater program, which she brought into the prison, into the jail, into the county jail, the county correctional facility. And I was asked and allowed by the sheriff and his assistant of projects and programs to come in and film, you know, what they were doing. And so they had this play that they were all reading. And so for me, you know, I am not a proponent of putting people in cages by any means. I feel that like criminality is caused by something in someone's life that they didn't get, that they should have gotten. And so we have to take a step back and look at what these people need and how to set them up in life, and how to give them some some basic equal opportunities. So when someone comes in, brings them back to life, and shows them that they can be creative, and that they can be talented, they can be more than they thought they were, it just really tickles me, and it really makes me interested in doing this. Joan O'Byrne and Robin Chandler also worked with these prisoners to bring them programs for literacy and theater and things that were more interesting. One of the things that GCTV was doing through the president of our board, Gary Lange, was to come in, I think it was just right around the holiday time, and each prisoner or inmate would come into a room and would read like a Christmas story or a bedtime story and have some things to say. We would print out a DVD, and that would get sent to their family, so their children could see them on the holiday, and could, you know, have something to look at and some well wishes from their mom or dad. So there's a lot of opportunities in incarcerated areas to teach creative arts, because I think that's one of the things that's the most missing among people, is the art and music that they need to help them develop the mind to make the best decisions for themselves that they can. So let's see When the System Swallows You. And I want to thank our excellent technical specialist here, Vanessa, from the Lava Center.
Really, couldn't they have done anything to help me and my son to get away together? You know, I went 7 years without hearing from his grandparents. 7 years without knowing my firstborn.
Well, When the System Swallows You is a play about a family who is experiencing life in the system. And when I say the system, I'm referring to the prison system, the reform system, the juvenile detention centers, group homes, that sort of thing. And so it follows this family through a series of letters that kind of really get at the heart at how, even if it's just one person in the family that's incarcerated, it really affects the family as a whole. So it's sort of an intimate glimpse into that. I wrote this play a couple years ago, and it's very, very true for me and my family. And so it's been really great to be here and work with these folks. We do a series of exercises in this program, from vocal warm-ups to physical warm-ups, and stimulating our imagination. So one of the exercises I love to do is sound and gesture, and as a beginning actor, it's a really great place to start because you can't think about it too much. And you have to try on what other people are doing. So it's a great way for you to kind of kick back and relax with it if you'd like, or take a creative risk.
Big black bug bit the big black bear.
The big black bug bit the big black bear.
It feels good. I mean, it feels like a big weight's been lifted because, like I said, I don't know, just before this, I was always nervous about everything, talking to people. I was kind of like antisocial a lot. So for this to happen, it's just like, I feel a lot better about myself, knowing I can do it, not have to like stress out and get like worked up about it. So it's kind of cool.
I've been in this group now since August, and I've written letters, poems, stuff that, I never really actually did before when I was out. And, it just helps us keep a clear mind, instead of just being on the cell unit. Some of us have gotten letters from people on the outside, saying, oh, your letter was really inspirational, oh, your poem, I really liked it. I mean, I've sent some of my poems to poetry contests and, just trying to feel what's out there. I've read poetry, but I've never actually wrote a poem, so it's amazing what some of the time will do to some of us here and turn us around.
There's a lot of enthusiasm about this. People are very nervous about moving their bodies sometimes. There's a lot of people have very difficult lives, and the traumas live within us. So I think to be able to express ourselves in a very safe environment can be really helpful. Many of these people did not finish high school, and if they did go to high school, maybe they went to a high school where the arts programs had been cut, and they didn't have the opportunity to express their tactile, their hand-eye involvement and express their imaginations. And so we're trying to broaden our idea of education at the jail to beyond GED prep, high school equivalency exam, and really get people to discover other parts of themselves that they might not have had exposure to.
He's in a group home at this point. It's like the fourth part of the play. And she keeps saying that she's gonna come visit him, and that she wants him to live with her, but yet she don't come visit him. And then the people there calling him names, and she's telling him don't get in trouble and everything. But yet, she does nothing for him. She don't come visit him and stuff. So, but because she can't get a ride, it's so far away, So yeah, we're just acting that part out. I'm really nervous about it, I figured
Why are you nervous?
I'm really not good at speaking in front of a lot of people.
You're doing it now.
Yeah, I know. It's hard,
So is this helping with that?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's one of the reasons. I'm trying to overcome my fears, I've done quite a few college classes since I've been here. I've been here 17 months today, actually. So it's actually helping a lot,
I just took in as much of you as I could. Your eyes rich brown, your eyes like mine, your lips full, your smile big like mine. I am your mother. You are my son. I pray for the day we come to know each other. I am doing everything I know how to do to find you again. I'm not giving up. The last letter I wrote came back to me and returned to sender. I have written so many letters to you. One day I hope I won't have to write because you will be right next to me. Until then, I continue to love you through these letters. Love your mom.
This is why we call this filmmaking for the purpose of advancing social justice, because we pick topics that dispel ignorance, that show people a different side of things than they normally know, and show them what we can do if we just care a little bit and have some compassion and throw a few resources in that direction. And so the filmmaker can help to dispel some of these illusions. Most people might think, oh, I don't know, what are they doing up in the jail? They're just sitting in cells. You know, why aren't they out working or something? You know, that could be one of your more conservative types of things to say. But then when you see films like this, you know that these guys have a well of untapped creativity and talent and willingness to do what they need to do in life. And they also have a willingness to enjoy life. And for someone to say, you're not that type of person, you have all these other types of capabilities and talents. You're not just some criminal that's in jail. You're a human being that needs some direction. And so that's, I think, the motivation for a lot of people doing filmmaking like that. In terms of social justice and what happens on the streets and with police and racism, there's a lot out there to do. And we just don't always see the community coming into us. What are some of the ways do you think that we can bring these resources out to people's lives in Greenfield? Is there something that we're not doing to get more people to come in and do this? I know it's tough right now because it's COVID time and it's challenging. I applaud every one of you and thank you from the bottom of my heart for sitting in a room with a mask on so that you can participate in this. So it's difficult, and we're looking for things. We're looking for ideas and for people. Does anybody have anything to say about the topic? The techniques or anything else? I'm just going to open it up for a general discussion right now.
I'll just reflect on why I came back to listen, because I don't do any filmmaking. I've just not had that experience in my life, but my granddaughter is kind of getting into filmmaking a little bit and everything to do with technology from creative ways, and I thought, well, this is a good way to enter this world, and I want to thank you for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome.
Coming and listening and watching what you've done here shows me connections in the community that I've been a part of some and not others, but it keeps it alive for me. So I can only say I support LAVA because LAVA is a perfect place to offer these things. And the audiences will increase. I'm sure they will. We live in strange times right now, but we have to keep offering them. So I appreciate your coming and sharing your knowledge and creativity.
Thank you. Is your granddaughter in this community?
No, she's in New York. She got into the high school that does theater, performing arts. It's an actor, a famous actor. Frank Sinatra High School.
Wow.
Yeah.
Frankie,
really,
baby.
really,
oh, yes.
But she had to, I don't know if this is relevant, but she had to like going into college, and it was so crazy. And she's just a normal kid. To make them do it at eighth grade was so crazy.
Yeah.
But she had to do an interview. She had to write a story, and she had to do a 5-minute film on her phone as part of her interview process.
Do you have a phone that does that?
She just
No, do you?
Yes, I do. So it's opened the world to me to using my phone.
Right.
Not only I finally got it to use to take pictures, but also filming a little bit. And
Give us a call, 774-4288, or stop by GCTV. We're open to the public. I'd love to have a discussion with you about maybe training you how to use one of our simpler cameras or enhancing what you do on your phone with some of our clips and other materials that we have, especially if you're interested in getting these types of topics, you know, or any kind of topic really. And wouldn't it be great to say to your granddaughter when she's out filming, hey, no, you can't do it that way. You need to attach this to this.
Well, you know,
or you can just share. You have a shared interest.
When you talk about getting the perspective and where to aim the camera, I'm still trying to figure out where to aim the camera for still photos. So to see it as live action is just, it's just one more of those consciousness building things of seeing the world in a different way.
Right.
That I so appreciate, that I finally have time to explore. Yeah.
I do a show called Sacred Spaces where I do some expansive landscapes, but a lot of it is really looking at the stuff that most people walk by.
Exactly.
Like those little microcosms of things. And so, you know, there's so much out there, but to really just like go in and illuminate something that you see, that you find special, that everybody else is walking by, gives other people the opportunity to share that moment with you.
Yeah. So I want to thank you for...
Thank you. Come in and see us. Tom, do you have anything you'd like to say, offer?
Nothing comes to mind at the moment.
You have an art show coming up soon here, do you not?
May.
In May. And what is the nature of your art?
I would say that I've been inspired by surrealism, psychedelic art, voodoo, and Marxism.
Is it two-dimensional art?
It's both two- and three-dimensional art. Assemblage, collage, paintings. They're not really paintings. I make it with construction paper. It looks like a painting.
Would you like to either be able to or have some people that you know who appreciate your work, who I can train to film your presentation when you have your opening?
Absolutely.
Let's come on in and let's talk about that.
Okay, definitely.
Anybody else? Nick, no more from you. No, just kidding.
I mean, I'm always fascinated because I think about all the different strands that get presented here. And I'm sorry, I don't recall your name.
Oh, Edie.
Edie, I'm Nick. One of the things you mentioned, and I think it's such a true thing, is that we see differently than the lens sees. And so it's really interesting learning how to see like the lens. Like whether you're taking a still picture or
It's a totally new idea for me. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, it's
I mean, maybe self-evident, but I don't think so.
I bring a camera out to some beautiful scenery that my naked eyes have seen, and the camera in the window, it doesn't come anywhere, there's nothing.
Interesting.
It's like, I'm like, how do I make film? Like, what kind of iMac or like advanced camera do I need to get to make it have that kind of depth of field, to make it have that expansive periphery, you know? It's just, this is where you appreciate your eyes so much being a filmmaker. And yet one of the reasons why I do smaller areas is because I know camera can't really show the beauty of that expansive thing the way that I'm seeing it. I mean, I'm gonna have to do something special with that shot to bring out some of that, you know, and I'm not gonna come close to what my naked eye sees. But it's still gonna look really nice on TV with some music and a little river in the background. Relax you right away.
Yeah, and I am such a huge advocate for just doing things. And from that, you're like, well, that's not what I wanted. And then you're like, so then you think about, well, what is it that it's not showing? What is it that it is showing that I missed when I look at this other, you know, view of what I was experiencing? And my daughter laughs at me because every few years we go to Mass MoCA, and I end up taking a lot of pictures of like a particular corner of a brick. Like, we'll have all this art, and I'm like, look at the way this brick is chipped with this, like, you know, look at that. And you take like a little close-up picture of it, and then you blow that up, and it's like, that is a fascinating little world that we didn't notice because we were staring at this other art. Or I was in the Yale Art Library, Art Museum. It was free, to go to, and I was down there. And there was a painting where on the side of the painting, because again, you're always just looking at the front, but on the side of the painting, the stapling was incredibly irregular. And like, I got up close and I was taking pictures and the guard got really red. I'm like, no, I was like, look at the staples. And he was like, you're crazy, man. But it's a thing of like having taking away from the social justice aspect for a second, but that opportunity to see the world in a little bit of a different way.
Sure.
And then when you tie that into the social justice, because you've been looking at things a little bit differently, you start to figure out, what do I focus on? And how do I frame this person? What is happening in the background behind the person? There were little moments like that I kept thinking about while I was watching these. And so it's really it's a process and a journey, and doing it with people who have already done this gives an opportunity for feedback and sharing and things like that. I do want to mention one thing that's really interesting is I've also filmed some protests and things and demonstrations over the years. And one thing that's really struck me in the last couple of years is a strong desire not to show the faces of the people protesting, which is such a different thing from what I came from before. And so thinking about that again and how I film things. So when we went out and filmed the Black Lives Matter march through Greenfield, consciously taking over the shoulder shots of signs, but trying to do it over people's shoulders, showing the magnitude of people there from a back angle. Yeah. And it's such a strange experience to me because I identify so much to people's faces as part of their movement. And so it was really intriguing to me.
And it's really illuminating what shows in some people's faces, because when I did that sweep on that first show, I went back and looked and I saw who had what kind of reaction, and that was very interesting because that tells a lot of the story right there. It tells a lot of the emotion of the story. There was a woman who was like, "What? What's things like that show you? Oh, this was I don't have to explain what this was. This was like a surprise intervention, So it's amazing what you can see through the camera. And it's amazing what you can see through your own eyes when you learn to look through the lens,
Just
like
to
a camera.
clarify, were you saying that you have moved to taking over the shoulder shots as a protective measure of the people being in the protests?
Yes.
So not to identify them because of what's been going on the
Privacy
last few
aspects,
years?
things like that, yeah.
Interesting, yeah.
Any more thoughts? Well, I'm going to say thank you, everyone. This will be available online and probably airing on TV. Ian likes to schedule my programs for when I arrive at 10 a.m. I see myself on TV. It's a great boost. Let me come in and get some training from me. Not you. We'll be working. We should have a discussion about doing more of this type of stuff in the future. Let me teach you, and let me teach you in a way that teaches me as well. Thank you very much.
The response we get is less than welcoming, and I cannot help but think that some of that has something to do with race.
I had to do something I thought I would never do, and that was I had to apply for public assistance.
The media and hearsay and rumors had such a huge part in the spreading of a story that we now know to be almost completely false.
Every white person in this crowd came with us today to stand in front of us, to have our back.